Well, today is a very interesting day because we're going to have a conversation with Mr. Bryce Zabel about UFOs. We're going to learn a lot. Stay tuned.
The U.S. intelligence community on Friday released a long-awaited report on what it knows about UFOs, or unidentified flying objects.
Again, there is no indication of aliens or terrestrial activity with these recent takedowns.
There's footage and records of objects in the skies that we don't know exactly what they are.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
I can tell you, I think it was not from this world.
We're saying that there's something our pilots are seeing, and so we want to get to the bottom of it.
Do you think extraterrestrial life is out there?
I think it's statistically unrealistic to think it isn't.
So the reason I wanted to talk to you is that this is a real interest of mine. And it's not just an interest because I think there's a little green men that are going to pop out of a silver disc. I actually think that there's something happening to the world, and that whether everything is coming together in this kind of convulsion with artificial intelligence and how everything seems so confusing to all of us. And it feels like the perfect mystery of all time, whether it's tied to religion and everything else, is maybe on the verge of revealing itself. People call it disclosure or catastrophic disclosure or revelation, or, there are all kinds of biblical prophecies for what those days would be, and all these different kind of dire depictions of what the world would look like. But I think it feels like we are right there.
Aliens landed on Earth, and it was up to you to show them around. How would you spend the day? I think I'd have to bring them to Mark Harmon's house. I think that he'd open up to the aliens. And I think that Mark and I could have a couple beers with the people from another planet.
And when your friend Ross talks about a building being constructed over a craft, when we have a Malaysia Airlines flight, a 777 disappear into the air. And I'm not saying that that has anything to do with the phenomenon. I'm just saying, if the US government that can read what's on your cell phone anytime they want, and they can look at any square inch of the earth with the thousands of things in lower Earth orbit that are chronicling every event, you're telling me that nobody knows what happened to that airplane? No government on Earth knows what. Well, that's bullshit, as Ross Cothert might say. Yeah. That's my first swear of the. So I know that we're talking today on a Friday when Arrow has just, released through a very select group of journalists, not including News Nation, a hand-picked group of people to offer up to the public the idea that there's nothing to see here, folks. Go on about your day. This is just a bunch of technology we've been working on, and a lot of it is just a special access situation. You're not allowed to know about some of it, and other stuff is just made up people that are panicking about things.
So yes, you're correct. They have denied that any of these investigations have resulted, quoting, even one case of UAP representing off-world technology. I don't know what we expected them to say.
What in your mind is this moment all about? Because that's why we're talking, because I think that this is a moment, and it needs to be, there's a kind of a critical mass feeling. And this is a point of, of kind of convergence of all this stuff. What do you, because I haven't really let you talk at all, because I wanted to set it up so that I can load your head with everything. And then
I'm loaded.
and I want to hear you go because I know how much you are an expert in this whole world. And I just wanted to let you know my enthusiasm and kind of my headspace and how I came into it. But I really want to hear like what is going on.
That's what everybody wants to know, Michael. There's a lot to unpack in what you were just talking about. Just a couple of quick things first. You had what I like to call it a moment of Zen kind of moment where somebody realizes for the first time, wow, this is actually not bullshit. There actually is something going on. Everybody had it differently. You had your own that you just described. For me, I pitched and sold a movie to the Sci-Fi Channel nearly 30 years ago, and it was their first official film that they'd ever done, original. And it was about UFOs. It was called Official Denial, and it was heavy into all that stuff. And I had pitched it because I thought, well, this would be a really good story. And being a writer, producer who was a former journalist, I thought, well, I better do my research. So I started reading to make sure that what I infused that script with was all the things that people needed to know that they would find interesting in that. And I was sitting in this office over in that chair over there, and it was like 3 a.m. and the kids are all put to bed and my wife is asleep, and I've got this stack of books and I'm reading through them case after case and things like this. And it just hit me. I just had to put the books down and sit there in this quiet office for a moment and go, this stuff is real. There's a real phenomenon. Now, I've spent the last 30 years trying to ask and answer that question. Well, okay, I know it's real. Even the government admits that there's a real phenomenon. They have said in their other reports, besides the one today, they said that they're not Chinese, they're not Russian, we don't make them. All right, well, then those unexplained ones, do the math. Somebody makes them. But what are they? Who makes them? What's their intent? Why are they here? These are the questions that drive me nuts, but also drive me to work on this topic. I think it's the question of our lifetimes. Now, it is interesting. You said that, you thought people were like, hey, don't talk about this stuff. We're trying to have dinner here. Don't bring the UFOs into polite conversation. And I have to tell you that in these 30 years, I've had my share of moments where I call it, you're treated like the drunk uncle at the wedding. Right. That, I would start talking about UFOs, or people would say, oh, Bryce is here. Don't ask him about UFOs. Right. And there would be that kind of thing. Well, for crying out loud, don't tee him up. But I have to say, since 2017, that has 100% changed for me personally, because now when I go to that mythical dinner party, somebody is apt to, during dinner in front of everybody, go, so Bryce, what's going on with this UFO thing? As if I can explain to an entire dinner party, most people who don't know anything about it, what is really going on. So I think we are, to talk about your earlier statement. Yes, there is this mythical disclosure that people would like to see happen. I even wrote a book about it called AD, After Disclosure. And that would be, disclosure in that definition is almost like the government comes out and says, yes, it's all true. And by the way, here are, for every reporter in the room, here is a terabyte of video and photos and documents. Well, that's never going to happen. So I've actually changed what I want from and expect from the government. I no longer expect them to do the big disclosure, not freely. And they're certainly not doing that right now. I expect a different word, and that's the one that I'm focused on. And that all I really care if the government wants to do is confirmation. I've switched from disclosure to confirmation because it's a lower threshold. And confirmation for me is take us out of this world we're in right now, which is some people believe it, some people don't believe it. The sides aren't really talking to each other. We're not getting any closer to the answer. We don't want that anymore. We want to leave that world and go into what the next world is, which is what you're talking about. And the next world we get to through confirmation by simply saying to ourselves, there is something strange going on here. But what the government could confirm is, yes, there are craft. Yes, there are bodies, and we are looking into it. That would be good enough for me, because I feel like the people, if we were unleashed and somebody would simply confirm that we're not crazy, because I don't think all these hundreds of thousands and millions of people who have seen things and experienced things are all crazy. They're just not. And even if they were all crazy, we'd still have a phenomenon where we'd have to say, why are millions of people so crazy they're seeing things that don't actually happen? So either way, we have a phenomenon that we need to confirm to ourselves. So my take is that I come from, when you talk about history, my father was a history teacher. I've always been compelled by history. And I do think, if I'm going to lay out any prediction on your program here, it's not going to be long before we're going to have to rewrite all the history books. That's where I'm coming from.
Right. But they might say, why are these things only happening in the United States? And I always say to them, well, that's such an American-centric way of looking at things. And that's one of the reasons that I love going to Jamaica and Croatia, Montenegro, Serbia, Turkey, Thailand, Japan, Australia. It's a big world. And if you pay attention to what's happening in UAP world, it's everywhere. And, you know, James Fox takes us down to Brazil in that incredible film of his.
Pull this off. It'll be the most compelling testimony revealed. This is a level of confirmation that only a handful of people on this planet have.
And shows you that, look, something happened. That many people don't get together. The Phoenix Lights, when you have Kurt Russell saying, oh yeah, I forgot about that. I was flying my plane into Phoenix that night. And there was a whole thing happening.
He said, I'm seeing 6 bright lights coming towards me. Mystery unresolved.
Except, tail number for that plane was Bonanza 2 Tango Sierra, and I was the pilot. No way.
You know, it's a funny thing that people think of this topic as, oh, it's just a couple of kooks and it's just a couple of, you know, I don't think that Steven Spielberg has Francois Truffaut playing Jacques Vallée and Alan J. Hynek coming up in a cameo in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is almost 50 years ago.
Truffaut is wonderful to work with. He's really amazing. He's amazing because he's so simple. He's as simple as his films. I thought I was going to meet a very, very complicated man who had spoken down to the cinema to make these rather, tender, romantic, light, wonderful films about the human persona. And instead, he was exactly like his movies. And that's really, that's what set me back so far. Was I kept talking to Francois like he was more than the man who made Jules and Jim. And he's not. He's Jules.
I don't think that any of these, I don't think it's just for fun. Alan Hynek wasn't doing a cameo just for fun. You know,
we should put that nail in the coffin of this old canard that they just happen in the United States. That is really old school thinking. It's just not true. Part of the reason that I've been so convinced is that country after country after country has investigated this. And frankly, like, for example, the French in 1999 put out a report, the Cometa report, that basically said, we think they are extraterrestrial. Okay. And there's lots of countries in South America in particular that have been very open in their studies of this. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union was receiving their own share of sightings. Sightings have been, with a few rare exceptions, happened in virtually every country on Earth. Now, why the United States? Well, first of all, the United States had the best media. We covered it, we distributed it, so maybe there is part of that. But there's another reason that we all have to pay attention to, because it goes to the heart of why are they here, what do they want, who are they? And that is, the United States at the beginning may have been a target of certain sightings because we had nuclear weapons before anybody else did. And one of the things that has been very true about this phenomenon is over and over, whoever is flying these things flies them near nuclear power sources, and especially nuclear weapons. And in 1947, for example, the only nuclear weapon base in the entire world was in Roswell, New Mexico, right? So, of course, some of that's going to happen. We blew up the first bombs, and believe me, we were blowing up bombs like crazy in the United States on a testing level during the 50s. So if there was a nuclear connection, I mean, clearly that would explain it. But I just think if you ever hear anybody say, why do they always happen in the United States? You gotta now take that person with a grain of salt, because they haven't done the slightest bit of investigation into this. They haven't talked to any experts. They haven't read any of these books that are, I just want to do one quick thing. There is this report out today. Okay. This comes from the US government, and it was mandated by Congress, and it is a historical record of US government involvement. I haven't read all of it, and it does sort of conclude the headline for the CNNs and the news media will be and has been, oh, they said there's no extraterrestrial evidence. Well, first of all, they may be parsing things, because nobody uses extraterrestrial anymore. We talk about NHI, non-human intelligence.
Non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new, and it's been ongoing.
Because nobody is quite sure where they come from. If they were just extraterrestrial, maybe this rules out extraterrestrial. But what about ultra-terrestrial? What about they're here already? What about time travel? What about or mass psychosis, or we're in a simulation? There's 1,000 reasons that they could happen. So I just want to show your listeners and viewers something. Don't take the government report. Here's Cold Hearts, In Plain Sight, tons of cases. Here's Richard Dolan's UFOs and the National Security Site, so many cases. Goes back to 76, Clear Intent, where the authors literally laid out case after case. And the Freedom of Information Act, of course, has given us massive amounts. This is my favorite book right now. It's called UFOs and Government, a Historical Inquiry, which is exactly what the government was supposed to do with their 60-page thing. But I guarantee you, if you read this one day and read theirs the next day, you're going to say, wow, they left out some things. I wonder why they did that. And
well, it's similar to the Warren Commission,
yes,
and then Church, or the hearings in 75, where suddenly not only are you looking at government overreach in certain areas and obfuscation, and JFK fired Alan Dulles. So let's put Alan Dulles on the Warren Commission.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. By the way, I wrote an episode about that on my Dark Skies TV
That's like
series.
having my my ex-wife decide, I don't think she's.
I called it the Warren omission, which I still think is probably the best episode title I ever came up with, because it's actually it is true. They left out a lot of things in the Warren Commission report. They left out the fact that Oswald had CIA and FBI contacts. They left out that Jack Ruby was mobbed up. I mean, these are not small things to leave out of an investigation.
And also, from what I recall, there was a Chicago trip that Kennedy was supposed to make that got scrubbed because of
the same plot.
Threats. Right.
And the same plot, not that we need to go off into JFK land, but the same kind of plot that went down in Dallas was attempted in Chicago and Miami, and didn't come to fruition. But within a few minutes, I wrote a book about JFK, an alternate history called "Surrounded by Enemies: What If Kennedy Survived Dallas?" And I'm not going to go into big detail there, but what I thought was interesting is my take on the book was that if Kennedy had survived Dallas, that wouldn't have ended the story, because JFK and his brother Bobby, who was the Attorney General, would have gotten together on the night of November 22nd and said to them, wow, Jack, somebody tried to kill you. Who did it? And they would have said there's a lot who didn't want to kill JFK at that time among some of these power groups. And so they would have become the nation's first conspiracy theorists. Some of these things don't go away that easy. The reason that the JFK thing informs the UFO thing right now is that, again, it's never been completely honestly discussed. And even today, you will see the media in full complicity on this thing, where it's conspiracy theorists, right? Well, you know what? If you plot to kill a president, that is a conspiracy. If you have things flying in, if you have things flying in the, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It was a conspiracy that killed Abraham Lincoln. I mean,
that
wasn't a lone gunman nutter
No.
who is just, some unemployed actor who jumped off the, balcony onto the
Right.
stage and broke his head. No, it was a constructed plan.
Yeah.
That had co-conspirators. I mean, it's, similar to 9/11, where not in a conspiracy sense, but there was a conspiracy by those men to carry off, if you take the account of that incident at face value, it's still a conspiracy. It's still a conspiracy that the tobacco companies knew well and good what they were doing by having doctors smoking in their commercials to make you feel better about, going out and buying some Pall Malls or whatever it was.
Yeah.
The idea that your parents wouldn't lie to you, as I was saying in the beginning. No, that's the job sometimes of a parent when they're being too protective. And when you get into the nanny state, when you get into the idea that, if you want to get into the COVID vaccine mandates and how, boy, are people singing a different tune 3 years later now that there's more information and there's a sense of, I was in the drugstore the other day and this woman my age was in front paying for her things. She said, "Oh, do I need to get a COVID vaccine?" And the woman at the drugstore was like, "Nobody's getting those things anymore. You don't, it's not, get the flu vaccine."
I got one. Yeah.
But I'm just saying,
I
you used to get arrested and rolled out of the thing, but this was actually a pharmacist who was like, "Oh, nobody's getting those things anymore." So I just think we live in a time where they're flooding the zone with this Arrow report that you just showed. They're going to flood. Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick is going to flood the zone with, there's nothing to see here, but here's thousands and thousands of pages of nonsense, sort of like when it's a lawyer tactic, when you just give the opposing side so much that they have to sift through that they don't see the needle in the haystack.
There is something to see there. And that has been, by the way, the classic sort of governmental approach to this thing, which is, we're looking into it. Don't worry about it. And then they come out and say, oh, nothing to see here. And then they close it up. Like Blue Book went on from 52 to 69. And when the government said, we're not going to study this anymore in 69, there became no official place to go if you saw something. So I will say one thing about progress. There are official places to go. Some of them are private. Some of them are in the government. And there are places to go. But I think
places like MUFON and stuff like
that.
But
beyond that, but I think, what may really be happening here is that the government would like us to believe that this thing is a relatively recent phenomenon. And that way they can say, so don't hold us accountable for 80 years of, misrepresentation or disinformation, because really, that Nimitz incident in 2004, we've been on that since then. We've been looking into it. And now we're really looking into it. So I actually look at, when I read a report like that, first of all, I know how it came to be, and I don't give it super credibility in that regard, although it's fine. I'd rather the government is putting out reports and keeping the dialogue stoked. But the idea that the report is actually going to lay down the truth isn't true. And by the way, one thing I just had to smile when you said, raised with your parents wouldn't lie. This actually happened. And I think it's a great metaphor. My father passed on, and I got his Army footlocker, right? And I was busy producing TV shows and writing things. And, I just had other things going on in my life. And so what I do, I put it in the garage, right? And it's been there for about, I guess, he died right before 9/11. So it's been there a while. So finally, about half a year ago, I decided to get that trunk out and see what I could, show the kids and say, this was your grandfather's life and all that. I get out his trunk, his Army footlocker, and I start looking through it. These are the things that he decided to save, right? And they lived after him after he passed away. I see photos of a woman I've never seen before and never heard about before. My father married my mother, I believe, in 1949, and these pictures are dated 48 and 47. My father came home from the war, and the story has always officially been he met my mother, they got married, they had a couple of kids, story over, right? And now I realized when I'm going through the footlocker, there was a woman he almost married before my mom. Never talked about it in our family, never came up. So what I think the metaphor is there's a footlocker full of information on a cultural level, all right? And that footlocker has been in the garage for a while. And now we're pulling that institutional footlocker out, and we've flipped it up, and we're starting to go through this thing. And we're going to find that certain things aren't the way we thought they were, that the world isn't quite organized the way we would like to think it was organized. And there are things going on we simply need to get up to speed on.
But Spielberg with Close Encounters gave you this sense that of awe and wonder and curiosity about what it could be. And you remember that music that gets played that, you know, that everyone had to play
5 chords,
on a piano or a keyboard. Whenever you were around, everyone had to play that's those tones. And it created a curiosity in me that I know was reignited. And I think that that's not because it goes back to that very first thing I was saying to you about synchronicity and about we as human beings know and sense as animals that there's more to things. When we go to sleep, we spend a third of our lives dreaming, you know, or sleeping at least. And there's this great unknowable thing that happens after we die. There's this, and as my son said to my daughter when we were coming back from the Van Gogh exhibit, she was crying and she was saying, I'm so sad because the Van Gogh exhibit really made her think about death. And she was about 9 years old, 8 years old. And my son turned to her, and he was 7 at the time, and he said, Bunny, he calls her Bunny, which is a longer story. He says, Bunny, you don't have to worry about dying because it's the same as before you were born. You just go back to the same place because, you know, we were there before.
Wow.
And I just remember thinking, you know, that sense of the fabric of existence, the fabric of consciousness, the fabric of connection. When you look at your phone and you're thinking about someone and then all of a sudden it rings and they're calling you, or you haven't seen somebody in forever and you turn a corner and you're just thinking about them and boom, you bump into them. Or you have a dream about someone and then you wake up the next morning to find out that they've passed away, or whatever that is. We're connected by more than just zeros and ones. And I believe that there is a much greater world. And I think Spielberg really, with the music and the images and the childlike wonder, kept his curiosity at such a high level that even the end of Indiana Jones, which is this great throwback adventure series, but it had a magical, a spiritual element to it with the Ark of the Covenant. It had a kind of sci-fi feel. And then ultimately this idea that we're going to put something in a warehouse, we're going to lock it away like your father's footlocker in the garage, with a mystery that maybe it gets told later on. Here's my question for you. You've got your Tic Tac Go Fast, you got your videos, you know, the ones that are kind of accepted and received as, well, those are anomalous and those are actually kind of curious things, especially when you have a guy like David Fravor saying, no, it's a flying propane tank. I saw it. Like I looked at it. But you've got these things that are these shots that are only 40 seconds long, 30 seconds long. I don't know how long they last, but when you hear that there's 23 minutes of footage of it, and you can hear them go, oh my God, there's a whole fleet of them. You know, you have one of the pilots talking about what he's looking at on his array.
Right. Why don't we get to see that is a good question.
Well, if Arrow is saying there's nothing here, we have nothing. There's
show us
nothing.
that tape.
Then show us everything. Then okay, then declassify the whole thing. If there's nothing to hide, you know, and I think maybe Gary Nolan pointed this out in one of his recent tweets, but it's like if you have nothing to if you've gone through everything with a fine-tooth comb in that box in the garage that your father had, and there's nothing to see there, then let us look and let us understand what it was. But when they go, well, no, you're not allowed to look because government.
Let me put it this way. It's clear that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of evidentiary pieces that exist in various archives and files, and most of it gathered by the government or confiscated by the government over time. I mean, clearly those 3 first videos exist in longer formats, and they also exist probably in HD. They were probably, there's more than just the FLIR radar that you're looking at. There's really excellent video. And so the question is, look, I'm a patriotic American. I want my country to succeed. And I know that national security is important in a dangerous world. And I'm not telling anybody to do anything that's going to hurt my country's ability to survive and thrive. So, but I would say something like this. If there are craft from somewhere else and they're in our skies and we're aware of them, does it really violate national security to confirm that they're there and show the evidence of their existence? Does that by itself violate national security? And I would say the only way it would violate national security is if they were made by China. You know, then maybe we need to keep that secret. But here's what I say to people. Don't let the government or anyone else make you believe that this is a relatively new thing. And they might be Chinese drones or Russian drones or something. First of all, if Russia had them, they'd be using them now, or balloons. Because here's the thing. Back in 1947, there was a massive wave, and it continued throughout the 50s, into the 60s, into the 70s, where people have been seeing these things. But think about it. In 1947, when everybody was seeing craft, and I'm not talking about just little obscure lights in the sky, but I'm talking about craft. Airline pilots were seeing them. Military pilots were seeing them. They're being seen all over the place. China did not have an air force at that point. China is not responsible for those sightings from the 40s and the 50s. That is impossible. And frankly, Russia didn't have them either. We were sure if these reports that have been cited in this Arrow document agreed on anything, they agreed that Russia probably wasn't making them, that they didn't have this kind of technology. I mean, we had the bomb. They didn't have the bomb.
And that idea, is it in the Annie Jacobson book that it's a Russian craft that they sent over with like children that had been?
And I must tell you, Don Schmidt is a friend of mine. I've optioned his book, Witness to Roswell. And I know that Don has talked to hundreds of witnesses. And it's interesting. If you take the picture of Roswell and divide it into a jigsaw puzzle, right? There is no one person that can paint that entire picture. That's not how secrecy works. It's compartmented. But Don has talked to the 300 pieces that go into that puzzle, people that saw, well, I actually transferred this, or I was told by my boss, or this, and then the piece fills in. I mean, Roswell happened. I just, you started by asking a question. I want to make sure that I at least take a shot at answering. You say, what is going on? Well, the answer is, I don't know. But I will say this. I have read enough, talked to enough people, seen enough things, had sources, I've spent 30 years working on it with people, and the only thing I can tell you is, I guess I would just say some of the things that are flying around in our skies and are scooting around under our oceans, all right? Some of those things, some, not all, not even a large amount, but some of those things are from some place that isn't here, and they're being piloted by somebody who isn't us. And for me, that's enough. That's the basic mystery that we are dealing with. And it bothers me that 80 years after the end of World War II, we're still debating. Everybody tries to just find the one case. I'll have that one case and everybody will then switch over to that. So every show I watch, every book, lots of books I read are with the author or the producers trying to prove that UFOs are real. But UFOs are real. The government admits it. They're unidentified, they're flying, and they're objects. So we need to stop talking about UFOs like, well, I don't know if I believe in them or not. Well, nobody's asking you to believe in them. We're just saying there are things that we don't identify, and maybe we should try to identify them. And that's the central mystery. So for us to still be trying to prove to ourselves that the phenomenon is real is misdirected. We need to start moving beyond that to saying more like what you just asked at the beginning of this interview, which is, what do you think is really going on? And I would say this about Spielberg and Close Encounters, for example. Marvelous film. The guy's incredibly talented. It's beautiful. It had a big impact on my life to see it. But the idea of the benevolent space brothers is just one possible explanation. It is possible that it isn't just one group that's running around here, and there are others. It's possible the Earth is a pretty cool place, and word has gone out that people should come here and take a look at it for whatever reasons. It's also possible that they're not benevolent space aliens, but they may not be quite the type that are going to, like Independence Day, another popular film, fly over our cities and blow up the White House. It's possible that what we are dealing with is so incredibly odd and strange and bizarre that there is no good way to really bring everybody in on it. I mean, I saw Joe Biden do his State of the Union last night. Thought he did a pretty good job with it, but I can't imagine Joe Biden going to a podium and saying, okay, let me tell you, there's 57 different kinds we've identified. Well, here's the thing. I can just see him going, look, I just can't see that. That's not going to happen. And so what I like about what you're doing here and what we've talked about is the idea that we in 2024 are clearly at the place where we have to do it ourselves. We need to not count on somebody else to do it. And so that's why I encourage people. I realize everybody lives very active lives. They have busy lives. They have children. They have jobs. They like to watch TV and go to the movies and take vacations. I get it. Everybody's busy. But this is something that we should all devote a little bit of our attention to, because we will be better as a society if we're prepared to be confirmed. If we're not prepared, that's what Richard Dole and I wrote our book about. If we're not prepared, then yeah, the wheels could come off the bus here. And because we've seen what it takes to get people to do a run on toilet paper. Can you imagine how much toilet paper we're going to have to create to handle a run on toilet paper after we confirm aliens are real? I mean, we have to be more prepared. We have to we need more people to at least acknowledge that one basic thing. Some of them are from someplace that's not here, and somebody besides us is flying them. That's where we start. And if we know that, if enough of us know it, when it gets real, and by the way, we don't control when it gets real. If there's another intelligence engaging with us, then frankly, they could change that. And the one thing, I'll stop with this, the one thing that I've always thought about the secrecy thing is there is something that this non-human intelligence and humans agree on. I'm just trying to strip it down to basics. What do I know for sure? Well, the only thing I can know for sure from the facts that are out there is that both sides agree it should be secret, because both sides could end it. The United States could lay out all those videos and tell everybody, hey, take a look at it. Let's work on this together. We haven't done that in 80 years. And these others, whoever they are, could literally have landed on the White House lawn. They could have dropped leaflets over the cities. They could have they could have ended the secrecy, but they've not chosen to do it. So we are in a mode of secrecy right now where it doesn't look like the two parties that know the most about it really want you and me, Michael. They don't want us in on it because they've had ample opportunity to do that. So that's why I think it's time for us to all roll our sleeves up and get to work.
I couldn't agree with you more. And it is such a tantalizing area, the concept. But I just want to say want to touch on one last area. There are so many rabbit holes, an almost infinite number of areas that you can explore. It makes the Kennedy assassination look simple.
It does.
Because there's only so many seconds, and there's footage,
Yep.
and you got the Zapruder footage, and and Woody Harrelson's dad figures into it somehow. Like it's a very confusing. But there's
it's human. It's very human.
It's human. But there's a limited amount of data. When you go into this, you're talking about consciousness. You're talking about dimensionality. You're talking about maybe quantum physics and mechanics, or Eric Weinstein might say that's nonsense and it's not that, or because you never know once you go down a rabbit hole how the hell you're going to get out of that rabbit hole. And then you get so confuzzled, as my daughter says, you get so confuzzled by the whole puzzle that it's easy to give up, because then you think, I don't know. There's clouds in the sky and there's water in the ocean, and but when you start to ponder what happened before the Big Bang, for instance, this is something that I always go to with scientist friends that are friends of my wife, because everyone gets so literal and so rational about what's possible and what's not possible. And come on, Michael, that's ridiculous. If there were UFOs, we would know. They would have told. It's like, well,
not really.
But do we know what happes when we die? I mean, my son evidently has a theory.
Yeah. He should do the next show with you.
But we don't, the hubris of thinking that anything is the beginning. And I believe it was Socrates who went to the oracle, and said, and the oracle said, you're the wisest of men. And Socrates goes around and finds out that the poet thinks that they're the wisest, and the lawyer thinks he's the wisest, and they all walk around. And then he understands that he's the wisest because he actually has the humility to understand that he doesn't know.
No. It takes a smart person to know what they don't know. Yeah.
And I think that that's where this begins for me, is with that sort of Socratic approach of, well, I'd never want to think that I know more than I know, especially on this topic. But this topic is, I think, the topic of our times. It feels like it's happening. It feels like things are coming together faster and faster. And I know every generation always feels that, but this has some special new glue.
Yeah.
One last question for you, because you have some inside track. Sometimes I know that, and you can't talk about.
I can neither confirm nor deny that, but no, please hit me. Yeah.
So Grusch was supposed to release an op-ed that got. Was it a Dopser thing that they stopped his?
I don't know that it's. I'm looking into it. I don't know enough about that to say definitively, because I haven't talked to Dave Grusch about it. But
we were waiting for that in February. I thought that was sort of the
but I mean,
timeline.
Listen, Dave Grusch. Just to tell your audience a little bit, Dave Grusch, of course, is the whistleblower who came out in July, held his hand up, swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to a House Oversight Committee. And then he told a story about crash wreckage and retrievals and gifted craft and reverse engineering and how it went private enterprise. And he said he had the names and dates, and he wanted to tell them all about it in private session. So it was pretty impressive. I first met Dave Grusch in May, 2 months prior to that. And he had come to LA to do his interview for News Nation, which was the next day. So I was at lunch with Ross Coulthard and Dave Grusch, and it came up that we were a little concerned that Dave Grusch might be arrested when he showed up to do the News Nation interview, because he was obviously prepared to say things that would be rather shocking. And so the decision was, well, maybe we better put him on tape before he goes there. So if he does get silenced or we get arrested, at least it's on tape. So literally Dave Grusch came to my house, and I called up my son, who's a filmmaker, and I said, can you come over and record this for me? And he said, I'm kind of busy, Dad. And I said, I'll give you $500. And he said, I'll be right over. So that's how Dave Grusch first got on camera. And I have to say, sitting there with Dave Grusch during the give and take of that interview and the next day's interview, I mean, look, I've been a reporter. I was a CNN correspondent. I was an investigative reporter for a PBS station here in Los Angeles. And I've got the degree in broadcasting and journalism and all that. So I've talked to thousands of people, and I've been lied to by experts. I mean, I've had guys who are in prison look me straight in the eye. I didn't do it. And they're so convincing. And yet you go, something's not right here. I mean, I've been lied to. I don't think Dave Grusch was lying to anybody. He's got a little bit of autism, which he freely admits. He seems as honest to me as possible. And I do understand that there are multiple other whistleblowers who are standing by, who are first person contact people. In other words, they worked on the project. They saw the craft. They saw the autopsy of the body. They saw the video or whatever, not just Grusch, who collected all this information. And part of the problem has been that they wanted to see how Grusch has been treated and how this was, going down before they gave up their own privacy, and whether they would have to submit to really difficult, challenging times for themselves and their family. And it hasn't been good, because here Grusch did this, and again, the attempt has been to marginalize him. And reports are coming out from the group that's supposed to be investigating this that says, as you put it, nothing to see here. So if you were one of those whistleblowers, they're going to have to be dragged a little bit harder to come forward now than they would have been had Grusch been treated a little bit better. So I don't even know what I'm answering now. You ask a question, I feel like I've gone off in another world here, but what was the question?
Well, I want to pivot to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, and that particular tranche after tranche of, it's like we went through a period of time with the Sony hacks in North Korea, and the which I think the Sony hack was the North Korean government, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And
a friend of mine, by the way, ran Sony's IT department at the time. So he was the guy right in the middle of it. And I think I say this only because I want to put the UFO thing in a certain, just put it out there. He said this was very scary because it was pretty comprehensive. It was unexpected, and it was very difficult to overcome it. So we do have real enemies in the world, right? Yes. We do have people that wish us ill, and I don't think you or I are saying don't pay attention to that. But we're adults. One thing that you have to learn as an adult is you have to learn how to do many things at once. And really, that's kind of what we're doing right now. We have to pay attention to this issue. And it doesn't mean we have to give up being human beings. It doesn't mean we have to give up loving our families or hanging out with our friends or liking a good football game, right? Life can go on, but now we need to integrate this reality into our larger view. That's kind of my take.
And when people say, well, there's we would know about this. Somebody would have come forward and talked about it.
They have.
Thousands of people
They
come
have.
forward from, whether it's Philip Corso, who you
Yeah.
can either decide whether or not that has any value or bearing, but he's one of 1,000,
Oh.
if not thousands. And I'm not talking about people who see lights in the sky or,
No.
These are people from the military service. These are people but for some reason, they are immediately discredited in the sense that if you're an airline pilot and you said you saw something in the sky, the first thing that happened was a psych eval.
Right.
And the next thing that happened is they pulled you off your
Right.
roster.
Right.
So you're not doing those flights anymore until you learn.
It's interesting. Michael, I'm one of the things I'm currently doing is I've been hired to write a series of a podcast scripted series, and it's currently called Undeniable, and it's about what happens after we all at the same time realize we're not alone, and that some of them are here now, right? And I think that that's the thing that is kind of shocking and interesting. It's like we are at that moment. And that's what I'm lucky enough as a writer to be writing about. But we are at that moment where we're all about to, when we did After Disclosure, the book, we divided the calendar into BC, which was before confirmation, and AD, which is after disclosure, right? So the way I look at this right now is we're in the last years or days of BC, and we're about to cross over into AD. And what I always say as a reference for people who remember the movie and Dr. Strangelove, General Buck Turgidson, played by George C. Scott, is trying to minimize what nuclear war would mean. But I apply what he said to disclosure. He says, I ain't saying we're not going to get our hair mussed. And I think that we're going to have to say, yes, disclosure is going to be messy. And, I think that people need to do what you and I are doing right now. I've enjoyed this time, by the way, and we should do a TV show or something, but I think it's all fascinating. And I thought, since you brought up synchronicity, can I tell you a synchronicity story
Sure.
to give us a little bit of a finale here? But this is a very small thing, but this happens to a lot of people all the time. When I was doing Dark Skies, I had my UFO book collection. I had 100 or so books. And my partner at the time, a guy named Brent Friedman, said, have you ever read the Mothman Prophecies? And that's the John Keel book. And John Keel was significant because he understood that there was a real phenomenon, but he wasn't prepared. And this is apropos of the Arrow report today. He wasn't prepared to say it's extraterrestrial any more than Jacques Vallée, who most people know. He's always said this is stranger than extraterrestrial. Maybe there's extraterrestrials involved, but there's something else going on too. All right. So Brent says, have you ever read the Mothman Prophecies? And I said, no. And he goes, well, you might want to read it. It's kind of a good book, good read. So I bought the book. And I was reading it, and it was in the back seat of my car. And this is like 3 days after he told me to do it. And my wife says, you've been too busy at work. You need to take your son to the movies. Right. So I went, all right. So I take my son, Jonathan, to the movies. We finish, we get out of the local movie theater, and we're walking to our car, and it's about 10 o'clock at night. So it's dark. And as we're walking out, there's this dude at the end of the parking lot in a long black kind of duster affair. And he's walking toward us, and it was a little disquieting. I mean, he just looked not quite right. And so I said to my son, get on this side of me. So he gets on the other side of me so that I'm going to be the guy going past this guy. And as we're walking down there and I go past him, I look over, he is holding a copy of the Mothman Prophecies. What's the chance of that? My friend didn't put him up to it. Did I attract that into my life by even reading the thing? What explains that? Now, you can say, well, there's lots of coincidences, but that's a pretty big one. I mean, that kind of stuff happens. And it leads me to believe that there is a truth beyond just extraterrestrial. So I'm entirely willing to read this Arrow report and say, well, thank you for the hard work you guys did. And for some people, this will be good. It's at least a basic primer, if you will, on what the government has been doing. It doesn't get a lot of the details right, as I pointed out in some of those books, but it's a starter place. And so anyway, I hope this was not just a coincidence that you and I have met and that there's a synchronicity behind it. And I do want to say, by the way, it does look like we're having a conversation for the first time here, but I do remember that we worked together on The Crow. I had no idea. I did not remember that you actually came in for Dark Skies. And that's been a real joy in getting to know you again, to think that, wow, we are embedded all the way back to that TV series about UFOs. And maybe that's our synchronicity.
This is going to be the most interesting thing I've ever put on the internet. So,
oh yeah,
like bravo to you for helping me, explore this area. And I think it's just the beginning.